What's going on, guys? Welcome to what's a rare upload for me. Today I'm going to be showing you how to drive the DTM 1992 cars. Now, why am I doing this video? Well, there's been a lot of complaints about the handling of these cars. Raceroom recently put out an update which updated the physics of these cars. Now, the reason I'm doing this video also is because a few weeks ago I announced a new league for Exiled featuring DTM 1992 and of course the Touring Classics. Before the update, those two cars could go together quite well, but now they don't. There's about 3 seconds difference between the two classes, and they're very difficult to handle now. So what I'm going to do is give a bit of a how-to guide on each of these cars, how they handle and how you can counteract the negative parts of the update. Now, I've already driven the Audi, I've already driven the BMW. So I'm going to start with M2 and then work into the Mustang, the Mercedes and the Opel. So we'll start with the Audi because I've just been driving this. Okay, so we're in the Audi, we're at Brands Hatch. Reason I've chosen Brands Hatch is because it's a small track with slow corners, faster corners, quite a lot of bumps, and there is one fast part of the track. So what I'm going to do right away with the Audi is I'm going to drop that brake bias. In my opinion, that is way too high, especially for rear wheel drive cars, because you've got all the power going through the rear wheels and you're going to be basically, with the brake bias all the way to the front there, you're basically going to lock up the front wheels, and it basically causes the car to step out a lot more when you put down the power whilst braking, but also it's going to cause a lot of understeer under braking. So I've dropped it to about 62 because you do need more front than rear than you would in a front wheel drive car, of course, but this should be a bit better. Okay, so default setup, this is just natural handling of the car. Okay, here we go. So I put the dash there on the right, on the less traditional dash, because you can see what gear I'm in for each corner. I think that's quite important for this track. As I said, I've already driven the Audi, and something that's really stuck out for me as a bad thing for the Audi is the brakes. You don't really need to put down the brake pedal that much for the Audi. And remember, with these cars, all 5 of them I'm assuming, you need to allow the rear tyres to warm up a little bit. It only takes about 1-2 laps. Then you can really get the hammer down once they're warmed up. So with the Audi you need to brake early. But the good thing about the Audi is you put your foot down and you can drift it around the corners. Braking at the 100, ready for paddock hill bend, down to 4th gear. Not incredibly close to the inside there, but it weren't bad. Now you can do 2nd or 3rd here. 2nd here is easier to get on the inside. Short shift to 3rd, drift it around the corner. That was a good corner. Down to 3rd. I think I put my power down a bit early there. Stay 5th. Just before the line, ease off and turn in. Down to 3rd. This is a tricky corner in this car. Doesn't seem to like going uphill, this car. Not sure why. That's not a bad first lap in the Audi. I feel like you can get a 48 though. Have to double brake then. Like the preload needs to go up on this car because the revs drop. That's the rear wheel's grip. Purple sectors and a good corner there. That was a good corner through 30s. Yeah, I feel like the preload would need to go up on these cars. There we go, near a 48. Let's try one more time, and then we'll move on. There we go. So in the Audi, I managed to do a 49.1 in just 3 laps. Now, I am used to this car, so I'm going to be doing more laps with the other cars except the Beamer. But 49.1 is at the moment the time for the Audi. So now we're going to swap over to the BMW. So here we go, the BMW M3. So here we are in the BMW, same track, same conditions, same session. So one thing you'll notice straight away is the brake bias is at 61 for the BMW. That is why I brought the Audi down, because front bias on that did not match it. And you could see that I had to brake quite early for the corners in the Audi, but the Audi is really good in the corners. For the BMW, the negatives I've noticed with it so far is a lot more tail happy, so you have to be very, very delicate with the throttle. But also, the gear ratios are really strange. You're going to notice me changing really quickly up the gears. You do max out in 6th gear in this car at this track, and this isn't a very big track, so I brought it up to 4.2 for the purpose of this track. Something also to bear in mind with all cars, not just the DTMs, is you need to make your steering angle match your real life wheel. So 550 is what I'm on in control panel, and 550 is what I'm on in the game. I've got a T300. Other wheels is going to be different. You need to get it so it just feels natural. You can't be, wrestling the car, over 180 degrees. It just does not work. And you also don't want to be turning it a tiny bit and it be going into the corner, because you just won't be able to handle that. So we're going to leave it at default, all except, as we said, the final gear on the drive line. Let's give this a go. So something you're going to notice straight away is its tail happy. Oh! Oops. That wasn't meant to happen. Okay, we'll try again. So we're going to try again here, and we're going to brake later in the Audi. So the 100 sign, we're going to brake just past that. There we are. Stay in 5th gear. There we go, the back end snapping out a lot more. Just after the tyres, down to 3rd gear. There we go. We're already matching our times in the Audi. Probably could have done 4th there. Braking much later into Surtees. I think that sums up the BMW quite a bit. We will do a complete lap in the BMW. there we go, 49.0 in the BMW. So the BMW, what it does well is, if you've made an incorrection in turning in for the corner, you've turned too late, or you've broke too late, it's far easier to correct. But what the Audi's better at is the exit of the corner. If you mess up in the BMW, that's it. But if you mess up in the Audi, it's far easier to correct. You can turn that into a drift rather than a spin. There we go, fairly even in terms of pace. I can go quicker in that BMW, I know I can. I've done a 48.6 before. So the BMW is quicker, but it all depends on your driving style. I can probably fine-tune the Audi to be a little more responsive on the front, and I can probably tune the BMW to be far more stable on the rear. Now let's try something else. So let's try the Ford Mustang. First time in the Ford Mustang, I've never driven it, so let's give it a go. Oh, it's a very disgusting interior. Ugh. So there we go, guys. In the Ford Mustang, I managed a 49.0. I'm not sure how much quicker that can go. I'm more confident about making the Audi a couple of tenths quicker, and I'm more happy with making the BMW about half a second quicker. But the Ford Mustang, I'm not too sure, because it is a little bit unpredictable. It's got a high amount of understeer on the slower corners and on corner entry, but on corner exit it is even less predictable than I would say the BMW is. So there's a little technique you may have noticed on that lap is, once I'm off the brakes, I'm on the throttle ever so slightly, and then I have to sort of feel the car accelerate to its point where it's got grip for when I load the rest of the throttle on. It's all about timing, the Ford Mustang. If you get it right, it's quick. It has got the most power though, so that's something to bear in mind. In a rear-wheel drive car, all the power's going through the rear, so it's very so counteracting the understeer on the Ford Mustang is doable because there's far less understeer than the Audi has. So the Ford Mustang at the moment is the all-round car, but it's the least predictable. So now we're going to go with the Mercedes. So again, same track, but we're in the Mercedes this time. Gonna lift the brake bias just a little bit because we know we like around 61, 62. There's nothing else we're gonna do. We're gonna leave it a default setup. So let's give it a little test drive. But again, first time I've driven this car. Let's go. We've got a very short gear ratio. The final drive might be quite low on these. Initial impressions, and I'm only just at the end of lap 1. I like it. It's far easier to control, but is it as fast? Mercedes. It's I would say this is the most all-round car. It's got a good balance of understeer, good balance of oversteer. And it's far easier to control than the Mustang and the BMW. It's far easier to turn than the Audi and the Mustang. It's a 6-speed, which means you can use similar gears to the BMW, but it's got less power, which means you can get the throttle down far quicker. But the brakes aren't quite as good as the BMW, which means you have to brake earlier. But as I said, you can get the power down earlier and harder. So there we go, guys. I managed to do a 49.0 in the Mercedes very quickly. I can get a few tenths off that by getting an absolute perfect lap. But the thing is, with the Mercedes, all the other cars, they need huge adjustments to the setup. With the Mercedes, it needs some adjustments, like the dampers need a lot of adjusting, but everything else seems balanced on the car. There's a good balance of understeer and a good balance of oversteer, so you don't want to ruin that by over softening or making making it too firm on the anti-roll bars, for example, and adjusting the cambers by a huge amount. You don't want to be doing that in this car because it is well balanced as it is. I would increase the preload a little bit because mid-corner I want the car to be shaping out a little bit more. But coming out of the corners, as you increase the power, the car is going to be lifting on the front, which means, but it's not lifting enough, or the rear end is not compressing enough because it's still losing that, it's still losing grip on the rear. So if it compresses a bit more, it would create a good power slide on the exit of the corner. So I reckon that car, if you're new to DTM so far, we haven't tried the Opel yet, this is the one you start with to get a feel for how the DTMs feel. And then if you want more understeer, you go to the Audi or the Mustang, but if you want more oversteer, go to either the Mustang or the BMW. So here we go, we're going to try the Opel. There's only one Opel, which is a shame. Here we are, guys, we're in the Opel, which is a fantastic looking thing. It's more like a traditional touring car. So straight away I'm going to bring the brake bias down to 62. It's quite high on, or quite low, whichever way you look at it. Quite high front bias on the Opel, so I would bring it down straight away just out of continuity. And everything else default. Let's give the Opel a try. Oh, that's ugly. Look at those wires. Ugh. Voxels, eh? The engine sounds very empty. It sounds like it's missing something. It sounds more electric. So there we go, guys. I've done, it says 3 laps, I've done quite a few laps with the Opel. I found it a little bit tricky to get used to at first, but it's quite a well-balanced car. You can run in high gears and not worry so much about the rear wheels accelerating, but you do have to worry about the rear wheels, because the rear end of the car, as I was mentioning earlier, is quite a small rear end of the car compared to the others, which means that it's very light. Remember, the engine's at the front and all the power is going through the rear, which means the rear is so light, but it's got about 450 plus brake horsepower running through it entirely. So you've got to be very careful of that. It turns so well, the Opel does, really well. But you've got to be careful when you're in a low gear, very careful, because you will lose the rear end. But something the Opel lacks compared to the others, and it is a big one, is the reason why I'm a tenth away. I don't think I can make that Opel much quicker, because it has the delicacy, because we mentioned about the light rear end, there's the delicacy of the Ford Mustang. That way it's quite hard to find a way of driving and a setup that's going to make it very well balanced and drift around the corners like the Audi and the Mercedes can. The Opel lacks power. It is nowhere near as quick as, say, the BMW or the Mustang, and that's a big turn-off for the Opel for me. But the Opel drives more like a touring car through the under braking, entry and mid-corner. It's on the exit where you've got to be very, very careful. I'm sure with a little bit of adjustment on the dampers, the springs, etc., I can make it softer on the rear so it handles that acceleration a little bit better, but with that comes compromise about turning in for the entry at the corner. So it's one you've got to be careful with, the Opel. It's a very strange car, but as I said, it drives like a touring car right up until you put the power down. So there we go, guys. There is my assessment of the DTM 1992 cars. Hopefully you're watching this video before you have a go, and you can decide which ones to drive in what order to find out which ones are your best. So the order I would, if you're brand new to these cars or you're not sure which one to drive, this is the order that I would drive these in. I would start with the Mercedes first and foremost, because it is the most all-rounded car, but it's got a good amount of power, so you can get used to that initial boot of the rear end and get used to balancing the steering and the throttle. Second, I drive the Opel, because it made me very disciplined in the way I drove the car, because it's got such a light rear end, but it drives so smoothly into the corner. It makes you a bit happier about driving these cars. But I wouldn't get too used to the Opel right away, so straight from the Opel I would go and drive the BMW, because the BMW has got a huge amount of power on the rear end and it turns so well into the corners. If you can get used to the BMW, I would then get used to the Ford Mustang, because the Ford Mustang is the least predictable of all of them. And then lastly, I'd drive the Audi. Now the Audi, the only bad thing I've got about the Audi is it doesn't turn very well and the brakes are not very good, and that is a shock when you're driving the Audi from these. So that's why I would put the Audi last, because you can get used to the Audi in the longest amount of time, but you'll probably like the Audi the most if you find a way of controlling them, because it does drift around the corners far easier than all the others do. But if you can get the Audi to turn in much more sharply and still have a good drift on the exit of the corner, the Audi could be one of the better cars. But like the Opel, it lacks power compared to the BMW, Mustang and the Mercedes. So really, there is no outright greatest one. The BMW probably is the easiest to get a quicker lap time in. It takes the least amount of time to get a quick lap time in. It has got a dead end to it, in my opinion. There's not much more you can do with it, because it just has that high amount of power. So the order I would put these as in terms of favourites for me, personal favourites, my least favourite of all of them is the Opel. I had a little less joy with the Opel. It just had no character for me, and the sound is not quite as good. I mean, the sound has no effect to a lap time, of course, but it just had no character compared to the rest of them. And I did find it very I did get a little bit of a headache driving it, because it would do some things great and then other things really bad that would really let down the car. But my personal preference, the Opel is the least favourite of all of them. Fourth, I'm going to put the Ford Mustang. It's a little bit too powerful for me. It didn't have great turning, and it was very difficult to handle on the exit, but it's fast. If you can get the balance of everything put together, I'm fairly sure the Mustang could be the quickest of all of them. Third, I'm going to put the BMW. Now, the BMW coming into this video was actually my favourite before this video. But for me, the rear end is just a little bit unpredictable for my liking. But the BMW, as I said, you can go faster than the BMW straight away if you get used to the way these cars behave very quickly. Second and first, I'm very much torn. But because of tradition, I'm a big Audi fan. I'm going to put Audi first. The Audi is my favourite, and I'm going to put the Mercedes second. So we'll talk about the Mercedes. The Mercedes was a shock when I picked it up. It's got a bigger spoiler on it, so it means the rear end is a lot easier to negotiate. I mean, the Ford Mustang has got, you know, it's got a fairly big spoiler, but it's got so much power on it. But the Mercedes had a good balance between the understeer of the Audi, the power of the Ford, and the rear end lightness of the BMW. It had all of it put together, in my opinion, and it's the one I reckon can go fairly quick with a few adjustments. There is a dead end to it in terms of setup. I think it can improve by tenths, but not. Don't think it can improve in terms of half a second or a second from the default setup. And I'm going to give the Audi number one because, yeah, it's a nightmare braking. It's a nightmare to turn in, but that's what kind of a driver I am. I like the way you can just put your foot down and it just goes around the corner. For me, that is great rear wheel drive driving. But the Audi does require the most work in terms of a setup, because you've got to take the understeer off, and to do that, I would soften the springs, I'd soften the dampers on the front, I'd adjust the toe in. But in doing that, you've got to be very careful of how it handles on the exit of corners. So if you're going to make the front wheels turn in towards themselves, that's going to make the rear end less stable, and therefore you've got to do the same. So the opposite settings, so you've got to give it positive toe out rather than negative toe out. And the more you point the wheels inwards for the Audi, the easier it will be to handle when it drifts. But doing that with toe in, and of course that with camber, makes the wheels wear out quicker. So that's something to bear in mind. To set up the Mercedes to be a bit better, not much really. The dampers need a little bit of adjusting. You kind of want it to drift a bit more around the corners, a bit freely. So what I would do is I would soften the front rebounds and soften the rear bumps. That way the car does that. You can also do that with the springs as well. To make the rear end grip a bit more, you can also adjust the anti-roll bar, but the anti-roll bar becomes less effective the further into the corner you are. With the BMW, again, it's about making the rear end more stable. It brakes so well and it turns so well, but with that comes the compromise of the exit of the corner. So the exit of the corner, you've got to make the front end grip far less. And by that, I would stiffen up the front end and soften up the rear end in many ways. But it's all about finding the right tuning for that. The Ford Mustang is a tricky one. For me, the big thing that needs adjusting on the Ford Mustang is the anti-roll bars, because there was not enough oversteer on the entry of the corner, and there was far too much twitchiness on the exit of the corner. So front anti-roll bar needs softening on the Mustang, and on the rear end I would adjust everything to be a bit softer, so that way when you put the power down and the rear end compresses, it compresses enough so that you can control it. But the Ford Mustang understeers, so you've got to be very careful about how much that front end lifts. that will be the trickiest car to set up, but it's the one that will improve the most if you can get it to a good point. Now the Opel, something I forgot to mention about the Opel is it was very, very difficult to handle over bumps. So you may have noticed me you may have noticed me finding some difficulty keeping the wheels straight on the final corner of Brands Hatch and the first corner, Paddock Hill Bend. They're the bumpiest corners. So that's something I'd adjust straight away, is the fast bumps and the fast rebounds on the Opel, make them softer so it handles those bigger bumps better. The rear end was very, very tricky to handle, so I would straight away soften the front rebounds and soften the slow bump on the Opel. I'd also soften the springs on the rear as well. So they all have similar things to do in terms of setup, but that's my recommendations. Of course, it's all subjective. There'll be some arguments to what you need to do, but that's what I do straight away with them to try and get a baseline of how you want the car to eventually feel. Some people prefer more powerful cars, more rear wheel drive than I do. I prefer front wheel drive personally, but that's what I do as someone who plays Raceroom quite a lot, and I've done quite a few laps with all these cars and I know how they feel now. So guys, thank you for watching. That's my tutorial on DTM 1992. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'm going to do a video shortly on the Touring Classics, so that'll come up soon. Otherwise, keep an eye out for the live streams, and thank you for watching.